Hello, Roger McGuinn there in Florida. I hope you're having a good morning. We're having a good evening here.
Yes, we're having a lovely morning here. It's sun shining and about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a very nice day.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to go right back and speak about your parents. Firstly, now, they wrote a book called Parents Can't Win. So were you to blame?
Yes, I was the subject of that book. You have to understand, back when they wrote it in the mid-40s, Dr. Spock was very popular, and the subject of child psychology was a new thing. So people were trying to influence children with reverse psychology. Like, you wanted to stay up all night, they'd say, okay, but you have to stay up all night long. You can't go to sleep now. And you go, well, no, I have to go to sleep. So that was the idea. I didn't respond very well to their child psychology, so that was the reason they wrote the book Parents Can't Win. And I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing when they applied the psychological tricks to me.
Did they actually name you?
Yeah, they dedicated it to little Jimmy. That was what they called me.
Wow, you're a celebrity before your time even.
Yeah, when I was just a little infant. I think I was about 3 years old when they wrote the book.
Did your behaviour get better? Obviously not.
No, I didn't get better. No.
I want to ask you, when you heard Heartbreak Hotel, that got you interested in music. Is that correct?
That is true. I was given a transistor radio in the mid-50s, which it was a new invention at that point. And it was a very liberating thing because you could listen to what you wanted to listen to. There's a new thing called Go HBO, where you can watch your own version of home box office and away from your parents. And that's what the transistor radio did. It allowed you to listen to radio programs that your parents didn't know about or approve of. And rock and roll was on the list of things they didn't like back in the 50s. So I'd ride my bicycle around Chicago listening to WJJD, which at the time was a rock and roll station. I believe it's now defunct. I don't think there is such a call letter anymore. But Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel came over that, and I loved it so much that I asked for a guitar for my 14th birthday.
So you got serious?
Yeah, I did. And before that, I listened to all the different songs, the pop songs of the day, but nothing influenced me the way Elvis Presley did.
And so how did you begin by learning? Did you learn by ear or did you get a teacher?
At first, I learned by ear. I got a book from Nick Maniloff on how to play the guitar. The first guitar I had, the strings were too high above the fingerboard. The action was too high, so I couldn't really play chords on it. I just learned how to play lead things on it. Then I got a good guitar that I could play chords on, and I learned the chords from the Nick Maniloff book and learned the songs just by ear. I just listened to records and learned how to play the songs.
Are we talking rock and roll songs?
Gene Vincent, Carl Perkins. It became an obsession, really. I did it all the time. In fact, I neglected my schoolwork, and I wasn't a very good student, but I was learning all kinds of guitar chords and riffs and songs, and took the guitar to school and played it for the kids, and the girls liked me better, and so it was a real incentive to keep going.
Did you have in the back of your mind that maybe you could do this professionally one day?
It was just a hobby at the time. I didn't really think about doing it professionally, and then I went to a folk school, to the Old Town School of Folk Music, and that's where I became much more proficient and got into the banjo and the 12-string guitar in 57.
Was that a full-time school?
It wasn't a full-time school. I think it was on Saturday afternoons and Wednesday night. What happened was I got a job at a coffee house after a couple of years of going to the folk school, and so I was already making money. And Frank Hamilton was my primary teacher. He taught the advanced class. At one point, I went there and he said, there's nothing more I can teach you in this format. I can take you on as a private student, charge you $12 an hour or something like that, which was beyond my budget at the time. So I said, okay, well, I guess I'm done. So I just gave it up and went professional. I played the Cafe Oblique. I played there with a couple other musicians, Johnny Carbo and Lou McDonald. We had a little trio called the Frets. And then I played solo at the Cafe Rouet. I got $10 a night. If you adjust it for inflation, it's something like $75 in today's money.
You must have had quite a few songs in your repertoire.
Yeah, I learned quite a few songs. I learned a lot of material from Pete Seeger and Bob Gibson and other folk singers that I was interested in. I got a lucky break. The Limelighters came to the Old Town School of Folk Music while I was still there, so I knew who they were. And one night after the coffee house, I went down to the Gate of Horn, which was the big-time folk music venue. They had jazz and folk music. And Bob Gibson used to play there, and Judy Collins and Peter Yarrow. before Peter, Paul, and Mary. So one night I went down there after the coffee house gig, and the Limewaters were having a jam session with Theodore Bickel. And I walked in. I had my banjo and guitar with me, and they invited me to play the banjo. And I did. I played with them till 5 in the morning. And Alex Hoselev said, "We're thinking about hiring somebody to back us up. Would you be interested in the job?" And I said, "Sure." So he gave me an album to take home, and I listened to it and invited me to an audition the next day at 1 in the afternoon. Not much time, but fortunately there were songs on the album that I already knew because they were like Bob Gibson material. The Limelighters did a lot of Bob Gibson material. So I passed the audition, and they invited me to start. And I said, "Well, I'm still in high school." This is before I graduated. And they said, "Well, okay, we'll give you a call in June when you graduate." And they did. And they invited me out to Los Angeles. I flew out there and recorded with them on RCA. Tonight in Person was the title of the album. And that was really it with the Limelighters. And then I went with the Chad Mitchell Trio after that. And I just went from one thing to another. Bobby Darin after that became a studio musician in New York, recorded with Paul Simon on The Sound of Silence. I didn't remember that, but I saw him on television. He was doing a book tour. He'd written an autobiography a couple of years ago, and he was talking about how he did the demo for The Sound of Silence. He hired a studio musician in New York named Jim McGuinn to play the 12-string. Yeah, Paul Simon hired me to do a session. I remember doing they weren't called Simon and Garfunkel at that point. They're called Tom and Jerry, like the cartoon. So I did a session for Tom and Jerry. I didn't know who Paul Simon was. He was just some guy behind the glass in the studio. And he told me what he wanted, and he played the song. He had part of the song recorded, and he wanted me to overdub 12-string on it, which I did. That's what became Sound of Silence. That was a demo for it that he took up to Columbia Records.
And then I think Tom Wilson put the orchestral backing in.
Right, it was released as an acoustic song first, and it didn't do anything. And Paul was in England at the time, and he didn't know anything about it, and it was a big surprise. It started going up the charts without his knowledge. I guess Tom released it as a folk rock record after the Byrds kind of started that format. I had a Gibson 12-string acoustic guitar. Gibson was the first company to begin making 12-string acoustic guitars in the early 60s. Before that, there had been 12-string guitars on the market, but they'd fallen out of favor. So there's some old ones running around like Stella. Stella made it, sort of a cheap one that Leadbelly played. I saw it at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, hanging up in a plexiglass box. But nobody made 12-string acoustics for quite a while. And then with the folk boom in the mid-'50s, they became popular again. So Gibson started making them, and I got one of those. In fact, Bobby Darin bought it for me.
This is remarkable because for a young kid, because Bobby Darin was one of the top entertainers in the USA at the time, and I think he'd already started doing his acting as well. And so it's remarkable that you got so far so quick.
Yeah, it is. When you think about it, that at the time it just seemed like a natural transition. Everything just sort of fell into place.
So what did you do for Bobby Darin?
I played folk 12-string and sang harmony.
And did you see the Kevin Spacey film?
Yeah, I did. That was really good. I thought Kevin did a great job both acting and singing. He sounded very much like Bobby when he did his vocals.
From Bobby Darin, what was your next step? Because you also played the coffee houses in Greenwich Village.
Yeah, well, Bobby had a problem with his voice for a while. He took some time off to recuperate, and during the meantime, he opened up a publishing company in New York in the Brill Building, which, as you know, is the home of Tin Pan Alley and the professional songwriters. So he hired me to do that, and that's when I became a studio musician in New York and wrote songs in the daytime and went down to the Village at night, played in the coffee houses, and did studio work.
So, Roger, you're doing the coffee houses, and then I think you go over to Los Angeles?
The whole idea of mixing rock and roll and folk music came to me at the Brill Building because the Brill Building job required me to listen to the radio and be sort of a copycat to write songs like the ones that were already hits. And the Beatles came out, and what happened was I heard folk music chord changes in I Want to Hold Your Hand and She Loves You and other Beatles songs, because they'd been the quarrymen and they did skiffle, and that's basically folk music. So they knew all these different passing chords and folk harmonies that we were using as folk singers, but they were putting a rock beat to it. The beat they were using was not original. They didn't invent that beat. It was, I think, I'd give the credit to Phil Spector. It was like the Phil Spector beat, boom, 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 a syncopated bass and drum sound. So I started putting folk music to that beat, what I called a Beatle beat, and taking it to the Village and playing it for the people in the coffee houses, and they didn't like it. They didn't like it because it was not what they expected. So that's the story of what happened. But the guy who ran the coffee house put a sign outside that said Beatle impersonations. And I thought, uh-oh, it's time to move on. And that's what prompted me to go out to California.
What did you think that you'd get in California that you couldn't get in New York City?
I just wanted to get away from that particular venue. Well, it was just a job offer. I got an offer from the Troubadour to open up for Hoyt Axton there in 1960. That was my first experience in California. By the way, what we're talking about right now, most of this that I'm telling you is on my latest CD, which is Stories, Songs, and Friends. There's a lot of chatter between the songs. I'm just mentioning this because people might be interested in having a copy. From CD Baby and Amazon.
A bit similar to what you did with Live from Mars, is that right?
Yeah, similar to that. You know the story. And then also there's a DVD included. It's a sort of a bonus DVD. And some of my friends like Joan Baez and Judy Collins and Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen telling their take on what I did back in the Byrds and everything.
While you're at it, Roger, we better mention your website too.
The website is McGuinn.com. That's McGuinn.com, McGuinn.com, and there's a lot of stuff on there. There's my pet project on the website is the Folk Den, which I have over 200 free MP3s that you can download along with the lyrics, the chords, and a story about the song, just to keep the old traditional songs going.
And you're still bound for South Australia?
Yeah, South Australia's on there. It's one of them.
Where did you find that?
I found it on a sea shanty recording with, I think it was Ewan McCall and A.L. Lloyd. South Australia, I was born, he's away, all away. South Australia from Cape Horn to South Australia. I love that song.
Now, getting back to the Troubadour, and so I assume this is where you met a couple of Byrds, or maybe future Byrds anyway.
Well, yeah, I met Gene Clark and David Crosby. Well, I met David Crosby earlier. I met David back in 1960 when I was playing with the Limelighters at the Ash Grove. And David had been an actor in a play at the Ash Grove just before the Limelighters' engagement there. So he was hanging around the Ash Grove and just learning some guitar chords at that time. I remember teaching David some chords on the guitar.
So the three of you met, and when did the idea come together that you should join together and become the Jet Set?
I was doing the solo act at the Troubadour, and Gene Clark came backstage and said, hey, let's write some songs. And so Gene and I started writing songs, and then David came along and started singing harmony and introduced us to Jim Dixon, who was a producer-engineer at World Pacific Records, and he became our manager and got us to get Michael Clark and Chris Hillman and some decent instruments and a record deal. And it all just fell together after Jim came on the scene.
He was the one who got you to Columbia via Terry Melcher, the late Terry Melcher, sadly.
Right. Miles Davis was involved in the mix. We did this audition for Benny Shapiro, who was an agent, Miles Davis' agent. And Miles came over after we had auditioned at Benny's house, and Benny was saying, his daughter really enjoyed what we were doing, and Miles said, well, kids have a way of knowing things like that. So he called up Columbia Records, who were looking for a rock band of their own, because Capitol had the Beatles, and there were other bands coming up, and Columbia didn't have any rock acts, so they were looking for one. And Miles put Columbia Records in touch with us, and they signed us. Then
you started recording. Well, actually, initially you were at Elektra as the Beefeaters.
Right, that was a one-off deal that Dixon got us before the Columbia Records deal. He was friends with Jack Holzman, and I had worked with Jack Holzman as a studio musician in New York, so he knew me. I've been on Judy Collins' third album as musical director. So Jack signed us for one shot and renamed us the Beefeaters. Silly name, but it's supposed to be English. I wouldn't blame it on Holzman. I think the material just wasn't strong enough with the Beefeaters.
Now that you're signed to Columbia, and Terry Melcher was your first producer?
Yes. Yeah. Dixon wanted to produce because he was a producer, but Columbia wouldn't let him because they had a policy that they only used their own staff producers, so they assigned us to Terry.
Things started rolling when you recorded Mr Tambourine Man.
It was Jim Dixon. He overheard a couple of producers in L.A. talking about Bob Dylan, saying it's a shame Dylan can't use this great song he wrote because somebody was singing out of tune on it. Turned out to be Ramblin' Jack Elliott was a little bit tipsy that night, and he was hitting some off-key notes. So Bob didn't really like the style of recording where you go back and fix things, so he just left it alone, and it became a demo. And we got it first. Yeah, I still enjoy listening to it when I hear it. I'd give Terry Melcher a lot of the credit for that because, first of all, he hired the Wrecking Crew to get the band track, which was a smooth move because Michael Clark didn't really play the drums very well at that time. And Chris was just learning how to play the bass, and we were all just learning how to play electric instruments. And Brian Wilson was using the Wrecking Crew for the Beach Boys records, and in fact, Terry wanted to get the same feel as Don't Worry Baby. And the Wrecking Crew had played on Don't Worry Baby, so they knew the feel. It was already like a predetermined hit track before we sang on it. And then, of course, David Crosby's wonderful harmony sort of moved around between thirds, fourths, and fifths, made it creamy sounding.
Don't forget that Rickenbacker.
Yeah, I was the only one allowed to play on the track with the Wrecking Crew. That was quite an experience.
All in one go, you invented a new genre of music.
Yeah, well, it just sort of fell together. It wasn't intentional. And I give the Beatles credit for combining all the elements. They just weren't aware of it at the time.
Your sunglasses, those...
The little bird glasses, rectangular specs. The story on that goes back to John Sebastian. When I was living in the village, walking down McDougall Street, John was coming up the other way. And he was born in the village. So he was like a native, a Greenwich Village person. He was wearing some little round cobalt blue specs that he'd gotten from Felix from the Jug Band. And I said, wow, cool shades, man. He said, yeah, try them on and look up at the streetlights and move your head around. It's really groovy. So that was the introduction to the little antique sunglasses. So when I got out to L.A., I went to the eye doctor and had some made, and they became my glasses. I just wore them all the time.
Not only did you start a trend in music, you also started a fashion trend with those sunglasses.
Yeah.
Mr Tambourine, I mean, even though most of you Byrds guys were working in music for many years beforehand, you were literally an overnight sensation.
Yeah, it was a tricky thing because there's no preparation for that. There's no school for how to react to that kind of attention that you get. It's a little bit nerve-wracking because people do things that they wouldn't normally do, like steal your glasses off your face and rip the license plate off your car. And Bob Dylan had him for a while there crawling on his roof, so he got it worse than we did. But I remember being tackled leaving the concert venue trying to get to the car that was waiting on the street, and these little girls tackled me like a football game, It's something you don't really expect.
No, I hope you're all right.
Yeah, I was okay, but they just wanted a souvenir, like, I got his eyeball or whatever.
Trousers, belt, hair, you name it, huh?
Yeah, anything goes, yeah.
Now, at this time, you were playing the legendary Ciro's, which is, I think it's the Comedy Store now.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been back there for a long time, but yeah, Ciro's had been a 40s hotspot for movie actors and had fallen on tough times in the 50s and 60s and reinvented itself as a rock and roll venue. I remember Little Richard played there. Jimi Hendrix was his guitar player at the time, and we had a co-bill with Little Richard and the Byrds at one time. That was pretty amazing.
Roger, so you have this hit single and you have a hit album. I mean, did you feel pressure for the follow-up, be successful again?
Yeah, it was pretty intense. Columbia Records wanted 2 albums every year, and so we had to not only record, but we had to come up with the material. So there's a lot of pressure, yeah. We were touring and recording and touring and recording, and it was pretty intense. And back then, the kind of touring we did was not as comfortable as it is now. The tour buses are pretty much like motorhomes now, but back then they all had the seats in them. They didn't have couches and beds and bunks and TVs and all that.
But the good news is that you still produced some fabulous albums, and was it a conscious effort to do something different the next album?
More of an effort to break out of the folk rock genre and do something other than that. So we got into what we thought was jazz, but people thought it was psychedelic with 8 Miles High. It was a misunderstanding.
Well, I think it's psychedelic.
It comes out that way, but that wasn't our intention. It was trying to emulate John Coltrane's Africa Brass.
You produced some great albums. My particular favourite is the notorious Byrd Brothers, but by this time I think Gene Clark had left and I think David Crosby was about to leave or had left already. Right. He
did leave during the process of recording that album. He was unhappy because he wasn't getting enough songs on the records, and that was partly because of Terry Melcher, and I guess partly my blame. I wanted my songs on there, and everybody else did too. So it certainly opened up the door for David because he went on to greater fame than he had in the Byrds. We did him a favor.
Yes, I think you did.
Yeah, well, Stephen and Graham really, and David all had a wonderful blend together and really amazing harmony. I love what they did.
Look, I'm a big movie buff, and I just quickly want to get on to 3 particular Byrds songs. Now, a film called Don't Make Waves with Tony Curtis and and Claudia Cardinale. What did the producers or whatever, did they come along and say, we'd like the Byrds to do this and here's the movie and can you write us something?
That's how it went. I don't remember dealing with any particular people, but somebody from the movie company came to us and said, we want the Byrds to do this. And Crosby didn't want to have anything to do with it. He thought it was beneath him or something. But Chris and I said, okay, well, this would be a good experience. And we came up with it, Don't Make Waves.
It's a real catchy little song.
It was a funny movie with the house falling down and everything.
And the mudslide.
And Sharon Tate was in it too, right?
That's right. I really like Don't Make Waves.
Yeah, it's not a bad song. It kind of captures the spirit of the movie. And the reason it's short is because it had to be that length for the scene it was in or wherever it is in the movie. Is it over the credits or I forget? We're somewhere toward the end of it, I think.
No, I think it's at the start, the opening credits.
Oh, it's at the beginning credits. I haven't seen the movie for a long time.
Now, another film is Candy. Probably a more ambitious song is Child of the Universe, which comes at the closing credits. So was that a similar job? They showed you the film and you wrote it with Dave Grusin, who was a great jazz guy, and he did the Graduate soundtrack as well.
Yeah, they assigned Dave Grusin to the project and they said you have to work with him, and I said okay. And he and I came up with it. I think I came up with the 5/4 time thing, that it's a little ambitious. It breaks into different time signatures. It goes 5/4 time to 3/4 time or 6/8 time, something like that. Anyway, he and I came up with the song, and there it was. I haven't seen it for years and years. I remember, wasn't Marlon Brando in it?
Marlon Brando. Ringo Starr was in it?
Ringo was in it, right. I don't think I've seen it since we recorded the song for it.
And, of course, the most famous is Easy Rider, and you also made it the title of one of your later Byrds albums. That was a huge success, and I think that would have given the Byrds a bit of a fillip, because I know Sweetheart of the Rodeo, even though it's highly acclaimed these days, but wasn't a great seller at the time.
Right. It was probably the very worst seller that the Byrds ever had. But it's funny now that Rolling Stone has it higher than any other Byrds album in the top 500. So it was the beginning of that kind of combination of country, and really was pretty much traditional country. I don't think there was much rock in it. It wasn't really country rock. We were just trying to do straight country like Hank Williams. That was our intention. It was just to do country music, not to combine rock with country music. Yeah. And the two camps did not agree.
The country fans are a bit like the folk fans.
They didn't like anybody. We came down to Nashville and invaded their turf. We really fell in love with country music. That's all there was to it. It was all about the music. It wasn't about making a political statement. We weren't doing anything. I don't think we were even trying to get in good favor with the country crowd. We were just like the music. So we went to Nudi's in the Valley and got cowboy clothes, cowboy boots and hats, and and we went to Nashville and recorded that album, and we just loved the music, that's all.
To me, I mean, I'm no expert, but it sounds like a very sincere album.
Yes, it was. It was very sincere.
The Byrds, of course, released a couple more albums, and Untitled did very well for you, especially commercially as well. And then you guys broke up, and then you reformed with the original quintet. Had it been a while since you'd seen each other, or you'd bump into each other now and again?
Yeah, we'd see each other around. What happened was Crosby came over to my house and said, you know, some of the stuff you guys are doing as the Byrds is pretty good, but some of it isn't. And I had to agree with him, because we'd done that Farther Along album after Untitled, and it wasn't that slick. Produced it ourselves in England, and it didn't have a professional touch to it. And so I agreed with David that I would get back together with the original guys and we'd take a shot at it. And we did, and I gave him what I had, the best material I had. People have said, well, you're holding back. I don't think I was. I was just giving him what I had, and I think everybody was. It wasn't cohesive because we hadn't been all together and hanging around with each other where we could write a lot of songs together. I thought Gene Clark's input was very good, The Circle. Funny how the circle comes around, that thing. And I loved what Crosby did with For Free, Joni Mitchell song. For my case, I gave it My New Woman and something else. I can't remember what the other one was. It wasn't that great a record, but it wasn't that bad either. It probably just wasn't what people expected from the Byrds.
Now, Roger, so that was sadly the last Byrds album, and then you went solo. So was it because you had the safety net of the band, the other guys there, and now you're off solo? How did it feel for you?
Just different. I did have a backing band. I had John Guerin and the LA Express guys backing me up. It's like the same thing as the Byrds, but it wasn't the Byrds. If I wanted to call it the Byrds, it would have been the Byrds, but it wasn't the Byrds. So it was a band, and we were doing Byrd songs. Not a whole lot of difference, really. The public expectation of what I was doing was higher than what they were getting. It wasn't the Byrds, and they were looking for the Byrds. There's something about a brand name that you have saleability that you don't when you take it away. So, yeah, it was a bit of a letdown to not be the Byrds.
A really fantastic song. It's off the Cardiff Rose album, and it's Dreamland.
Oh, I love that song, too, yeah. I was on the Rolling Thunder tour with Bob Dylan, and Joni Mitchell was along on the bus, and this is at a time when the buses were motorhomes. So Joni would sit up on the couch behind the driver, and I would sit next to her, and she had a little book where she was writing songs, a composition book, and she was writing songs about everything. And I was about to record the Cardiff Rose album. I needed a couple more songs, so I asked her for one, and she gave me Dreamland, and it was just a wonderful song.
That guitar riff, you just make it such a catchy song.
Yeah, I give Mick Bronson the credit for that. The production is really great. He was an excellent guitarist and a great guy to hang out with, too.
When you got together with Gene Clark and Chris Hillman again to form McGuinn Clark Hillman, you came to Australia?
Yeah, we did. We came to New Zealand and Australia. We didn't make any money, but we had a lot of fun.
Oh, well, I remember on the radio, it was on all the time, Don't You Ride Her Off Like That. That's a very catchy song too, I might add.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
When you guys toured, that was played very, very heavily. It did do well in the charts.
Oh, yeah? Oh, that's good to know. I didn't know what it did on the charts. We did some nice concert venues. They were pretty big concert halls and good attendance. So it was fun from that point of view. It's just that we insisted on going first class, so we blew all our money. We had a good time. Yeah, I think we did some Byrd songs as McGuinn, Clark, and Hillman. I'm not sure what the demographics was. They were pretty young audience.
Now, another great album. This is recorded in 1991, and this Back from Rio album sounds like what I think the Byrds would have been like in the 90s. I hope it did well for you.
I think it did. I'm not sure how it charted as an album. I know I got a number 2 hit with King of the Hill, so that did pretty well. And I got a lot of work out of it. Got a lot of bookings. So it did well from that point of view. And recording it was quite a process. And I got Tom Petty and all my friends and some of the Byrds. Got Chris and David to play on it. It was really fun.
And were you actually back from Rio, or was that just the title?
No, the joke with that is that when I changed my name from Jim to Roger, a lot of people thought Jim went to Rio. He was my brother.
That's like the old Paul McCartney is dead thing, is it?
Yeah, it was a gag. And so the joke was that I was now back from Rio.
Now, lastly, I want to mention a limited edition which starts off the album with If I Needed Someone, and you do a really, really good version.
Well, you know the story behind the song?
No, I don't. No, please tell.
Okay, well, in the Byrds we did the Pete Seeger, Iris Davies song, Bells of Romney, and George liked the guitar riff I did on the Rickenbacker with it. And so he wrote If I Needed Someone based on that riff. So it's like the Beatles had influenced the Byrds, and now the Byrds had sent it back over the Atlantic and influenced the Beatles. And I found out about it with Derek Taylor, who had been over in London and flew back to California, came over to my house with a tape of If I Needed Someone, and he told me that George had written this song specifically based on the riff from the Bells of Romney, and he wanted me to know that. So it was a real honor to have the Beatles do something that was influenced by the Byrds. Then the reason I recorded that for my limited edition CD was after George had passed away, they were going to do a tribute album. And this label, I won't mention the label because it didn't work out, but they wanted me to record the song and then they would pay me back. They'd reimburse me. Well, I recorded the song with Stan Lynch and John Jorgensen, 2 of my favorite musicians in Nashville. And we had the track, and they said, well, send us the track and we'll send you the money. And I said, no, you send us the money and we'll send you the track. And they never did send the money, so I kept the track, and it was the impetus to do the limited edition CD. And so that started us off on our own label, because I'd been wanting to do that for years, but my wife, who does all the business, didn't want to be hassled with licensing and all the things you have to do. But she didn't realize that when we started our own label, it's a lot of fun, because you get to do the cover design, liner notes, and do all the things the label took care of and record it all. It's really great fun.
Anyway, look, Roger, thank you very much. We've run out of time, and it's been such a pleasure to talk with you and to hear your reminiscences, and what a fabulous career that you've had and that you are still going strong.
Well, thanks a lot. It was fun talking to you.